You are listening to the Happiest Lives podcast with Jill Lillard, episode number 52.
Welcome to the Happiest Lives podcast, where you'll learn to think better, feel better, and become the woman God says you already are. Here's your host, Jill Lillard.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is the 52nd episode, which means we've been doing this for 1 year. 1 year. So happy anniversary. Happy anniversary to me. Happy anniversary to the Happiest Lives podcast. And thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And if you would like to celebrate with me, the best way we can celebrate is you can leave me a review on your favorite podcast player app. If you like this podcast, I'd love for you to give me 5 stars and a little bit of feedback, as that helps the podcast get noticed. And we want to keep doing this work. I want to reach as many people as possible with the message of the happiest lives, which is you can have a better life. The happiest life is one where we learn to think better, feel better, do better, so that we can become the women that God says we already are. Okay. So a happy life is not a problem-free life. It is a life that recognizes that circumstances do not dictate your joy. Circumstances do not dictate your aliveness. And we can control what we think about things, what we feel, and the things we do. And we can release control of things that aren't in our agency, what God has not given us agency over, which is circumstances. We can trust the Lord, who is Lord over all circumstances, and we can let everybody have the free will that God has given them, whether we like it or not. So we are completing the podcast series today, thinking about what you're thinking about. And we've discussed how to do this. And we've also talked about some other things that you can think. I've discussed with you the benefits of coaching and how I help my clients look at their thoughts and see how their thoughts are playing out. And I encourage you guys to do a daily practice of capturing your thoughts. And that is basically journaling, asking, hey, brain, what are you thinking? What's going on in there? And just allowing yourself to free flow write and just see what comes out without censoring, without editing, without worrying about that someone might read it. And then you're going to take one thought out of that thought capture and you're going to put it into a model. And so a model, the self-coaching model, is a tool that we use in the process of heart scanning. And this is going to help you identify your current thoughts. And if you want to change them, if you don't like the results that those thoughts are getting you, then you can change them. So today I'm going to show you how you can reverse engineer a new thought, starting with a new result. But before we do that, let's do a quick review. In episode 49, we began this series and we talked about the power of your thought life. Your thoughts and what you think in this world is going to determine how you experience your life. So the first thing you want to be able to do is distinguish between circumstances, which are things that you can't control. Those are people, nature, politics, things that happened in your past. Those are all circumstances. We want to distinguish those from your thoughts, which are optional. These are what you are making the circumstances mean. So often, I want to believe my experience of this world is coming from my circumstance, but that is never true. It's always coming from my thoughts about my circumstance. So step number 1, we have to know what we are thinking, and we have to be able to separate the circumstance from the thought. Why? Because when we can step into what God has given us agency over, the free will to think, feel, and do, we can then step into new truths and power rather than believing that situations are governing our happiness. There are things in this life you can't change. This includes people, and you can be upset about that, or you can accept the way God has made things. If He has given us all free will, then who are we to be upset about that? No, instead, we can focus on what we can control and choose, which is what to think about our circumstances. In episode 50, Thoughts Create Feelings, we discussed how those thoughts we are thinking about make us feel. So we're turning on the lights, we're looking at all the thoughts that are coming up for us. And as we become aware what's running the show, we pause and we see how a thought makes us feel. Do we want to continue to have thoughts that make us feel that way? Now, this isn't to say you should always feel positive, happy feelings. Life is 50-50. We live in a fallen world, and feelings, things like disappointment, grief, sorrow, remind us that this is not our home. There are times that we want to feel sadness. We want to feel sorrow. There are things that we want to feel disappointed about. So a life well lived is one that is willing to feel. When we own the thoughts that are making us feel certain things, rather than blaming the circumstances, the things that we can't control, we can then leverage our emotions as a bridge that allows us to experience the presence and power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, no matter what the circumstance is. So half the time, we are willing to feel unwanted emotions without resisting them, without obeying them, reacting, indulging them. And then the other half of the time, we consciously will choose thoughts that generate good feelings. When we stop buffering, disconnecting, and trying to escape feeling and allow ourselves to feel, we really start living our lives. We become people who are connected and alive because we realize negative emotions are powerless to harm us. And they can actually be a portal, an invitation to greater aliveness. They can be an avenue, a bridge to experience the Holy Spirit's presence in our life. So last week in episode 51, we talked about feelings fuel actions. Consciously deciding what you want to feel will help you take actions that you want to take in this life. You're part of something greater than yourself. You're part of God's body. You are created for a divine purpose, and you're invited to partner with God by fulfilling his purposes and plans for your life. This relationship and partnership begins with a thought. By believing God is who he says he is, and you are his heir. You are who he says you are. And when we accept this truth about our life, about our identity, about our future, we do that by confessing a truth, believing and receiving, and then changing the things that we do, the way we live our life. It is a change of heart, mind, and direction. So you can live your life in fear, powerlessness, anxiety, hopelessness, but why would you want to do that? When you allow those feelings to be there without resisting or indulging them, but instead surrendering to the Lord in your suffering, you can move into new truths that fuel feelings of peace, joy, empowerment, rest, and hope. So today, as we talk about actions creating results, I want to ask you, do you like the results you are experiencing in your life? Are your actions bearing the fruit of love, peace, and joy? Are you building others up in love? Are you producing what you want for yourself, your family, your community? There are so many actions and results we want, yet we can't seem to do the things because we are going about it in such a way that bypasses our hearts, our minds, our will, and emotions. And so there is a disconnect between the inside and the outside. When we're trying to do things as though it all depends on us, forgetting that the Holy Spirit wants to do a work in us, we are no longer participating in his purposes for our life. And all we have to do is be willing to release some thoughts that we're holding on to and look at things in a new way. So you must become more aware and intentional instead of believing that life is happening to you. We do this through the process of heart scanning, exposing, renewing, engaging, and pressing on despite our unwanted feelings. So many of us feel like victims of our circumstances. We're victims of other people. Instead of turning on the lights and being honest and rerouting our energy into what we can control and trusting God with what is outside of our jurisdiction, we might get stuck in just blaming others, which just leaves us feeling so powerless. So, as we move into the topic today, actions create results, I want to share a short example of a client who we will call Betty. And she was married to Frank. And Betty was feeling unloved after she had a conversation with her husband. And when she would share something, Frank would reply with his thoughts about the subject without validating or observing what she just shared. And she began to tell herself that Frank never acknowledges me. And when she believed that he didn't acknowledge her, she would just repeat herself. Then she would end up withdrawing. She would quit acknowledging him. And eventually she would stop sharing. She would hold on to hurt, ignore the hurt, and then she'd push it away. And the result was she proved he didn't acknowledge her. Seeing this result and knowing the thought creating it, she knew it wasn't serving her. She needed to find another way to think about her conversations. So if we use this process of doing a heart scan and actually more specifically using the self-coaching model, which is going to help us expose and renew, we are going to look at a result that we are currently getting and see if we like that result. So the first thing that you will do is that you will explain, you will turn on the lights, uncover a result that you are currently experiencing and explain why. And that is kind of what we have talked about thus far. You're getting that result because of some actions you're taking, and you're taking those actions because of a feeling you're having, and you're feeling that way because of something that you're thinking about your circumstance. So you're going to lay all that out in an unintentional model. And that unintentional model is showing you the current result that you're getting and why you're getting it. You're experiencing a result because you're having a thought. So in this case of Betty, she is finding evidence that Frank does not acknowledge her because she is thinking Frank never acknowledges me, right? Which makes her feel a certain way, and it's making her behave a certain way. So the next step, once we've kind of turned on the lights, we've explained and evaluated the result that we're getting, we're going to ask, what result would we like to get instead? If we don't like the result that we're getting, we can see that another result is possible. We can ask, what is it that I'd like to see? If I could get any result in this situation, what would it be? Now, remember, when you are identifying a result, you can't put somebody else in your model. So you can't, in this situation, we can't say that Frank begins acknowledging me. Now, we may start to find evidence that Frank is acknowledging us, or we might start to acknowledge Frank, or we might open ourselves to the possibility that Frank is acknowledging us, but we can't say Frank starts to acknowledge me because that is Frank's model. And so we're going to keep the current circumstance that we're having, and then we are just going to start at a new result and work our way backwards. So we can do that by identifying the new result and then asking the question, if I was getting that result, what are some actions I might be taking? Now, we aren't going to know exactly what it is that we're doing that's going to get us those actions, right? We are simply using the scientific method. We are hypothesizing. If I was getting that result, here are some things I think that I might be doing. And so you want to identify some actions. I like to say do at least 3 or 4 actions that you would be doing that you think would get you that result. And we're going to try those actions out. And then you ask, if I was taking those actions, how would I have to feel? And a feeling, remember, is one word. So inside, for those who are inside my coaching programs, you have a nice feelings list. You can find different feelings lists online, but you want to constrain to one word, one feeling that you think you would have to feel, because that is the fuel that's going to create the action. And then to feel that way, what would you have to be thinking about the circumstance? And you could try on different thoughts the same way you try on clothes. So oftentimes I say, if you want to feel very fancy, you might go shopping for some dresses or heels or certain different textures and fabrics of clothing than if you wanted to feel really casual. And so you're going to try on the thought the same way you try on clothes, and you want to see how that thought makes you feel. So if we go back to this example of Betty, um, Betty, she was one of the ladies in my Happiest Lives group. She was a graduate of the Happiest Lives Academy. And so she's in VIP. And so we have a Slack group where we can regularly communicate. We have a heart scan channel. So she can post some of her models on the heart scan channel, and I can give her feedback, or she could ask questions of area places that she feels like she is stuck. And so even though she was already familiar with the process of heart scanning, and she knows how to use the model to expose and renew, she found that she was feeling a little bit stuck because she was struggling to believe that her thought was optional, felt like it was a fact. And so she was able to show us her unintentional model, which I kind of shared with you at the beginning. That's how we discovered the result that she was experiencing. That the unintentional model began with this thought that Frank never acknowledges me, which she recognized was not true. It was an optional thought. And even if it were true, that thought was not serving her. It was an assessment that had no upside. So, to reverse engineer a new result, she asked, what result would I like? I don't like this result I'm experiencing. So, she knew she didn't want to continue to prove that Frank wasn't acknowledging her. And she also knew that she could not get into Frank's model and make him acknowledge her. So, the result could not be that Frank acknowledges me. She decided on a new result. I find evidence that I'm acknowledged, which could include acknowledging herself and also providing opportunities for Frank to acknowledge her. So, to reverse engineer her new result, she asked herself, if I was finding evidence that I'm acknowledged, what might my actions be? And so she didn't know exactly what those actions would be, but she's opening up her brain to explore what are some things that I might be doing different than I'm doing them now. And she could even look at the current action she was taking and do the opposite of those things. But she identified 4 actions that she thought she could try that would get her this new result that she was finding evidence that she was acknowledged. And so one of those included active listening. Betty decided she would consciously try to listen to Frank during their conversations. Instead of focusing solely on her need for acknowledgement, she would also pay attention to Frank's words, thoughts, and feelings, demonstrating her respect and appreciation for his perspective as well. She also wanted to take a genuine interest by asking meaningful questions and engaging in heartfelt conversations. She wanted to convey her desire to truly understand and connect with one another and validate him and be validated as well. She also identified an action of sharing her observations with Frank and making a request. And so Betty wanted to communicate openly and honestly with him rather than harboring resentment or withdrawing emotionally. And so she wanted to point out the observation to Frank that she was repeating herself often during their conversations, and that maybe that could feel really annoying for him. That she was thinking that he wasn't hearing what she was saying. And so she would say it again. And so she then made a request that maybe after I share something, before you share your thoughts, you could acknowledge what it was I said. Check in to see if you were understanding what I said. And that way I would know that you heard what I was saying. And so she could have a general conversation with him about this, or she might just decide the next time they were having a conversation, if she was the one who was sharing something, if Frank was proceeding to then give his thoughts and feelings, she might gently interrupt him and say, hey, wait a minute, I want to hear what you're saying. But before you tell me what you're thinking, I want to make sure you heard what I said. What did you hear me say? And does that make sense to you? And so that way she was inviting Frank to acknowledge what it was that she was sharing. And then 4th action, she wanted to be able to feel more appreciation and gratitude, being able to acknowledge that and acknowledge his contributions and acknowledge his presence in her life. And this would help reinforce a positive cycle of appreciation within the relationship. So the next thing that she needed to do, now that she had identified a new result, she identified 4 actions she would be taking that would get her that new result, she would have to figure out what it is that she would need to feel if she was doing those things. What energy would fuel those actions? And so she picked the emotion of encouraged. She wanted to feel encouraged inside. Now, you may have picked a different feeling. You might pick something like hopeful or open or compassionate, patient. There's all sorts of feelings that you could pick, but this is the feeling that felt effective to her. If she felt encouraged, she would show up in a different way. So she then asked herself, to feel encouraged when we're having conversations, what do I need to think? So even if the circumstance was exactly the same, that she shared something and then Frank went on to share his thoughts and feelings, what would she have to think about that would make her feel encouraged? The thought she decided on was, I am learning to acknowledge myself and Frank. When she thought this, she felt encouraged, and then she could take the above actions that we were just discussing. This, in turn, would give her the new result. The new result was that she was finding evidence that she was acknowledged. So this is the process that we use inside all of my coaching programs, including Clarity and Courage and the Happiest Lives Academy. And if you want help with this work, you can learn all the things here on the podcast, but what the podcast doesn't do is give you feedback. It doesn't help you apply these concepts to your life. And so if you would like some feedback, if you want to have avenues and tools and ways to apply these concepts, such as thinking about what you're thinking about, then you might want to consider joining me in Clarity and Courage. I like to call it my cost-effective and time-effective coaching group for Christian women who want to think, feel, love better, do better, be better, because it surrounds you with the support, the tools that you need, and you get to see this coaching done live. I can coach you, or you can watch me coach somebody else, and it can be incredibly powerful. So in summary of today, if you want to get new results in your life, you can do that by asking yourself questions. Number 1, do I like the result I'm getting? And if not, number 2, what else is possible? What result would I like to get? Then you can ask yourself, what new actions would I be doing? So that's where you are hypothesizing some new actions to take. And then if you're going to take those actions, ask, how would I have to feel? And then lastly, what would I be thinking if I felt that way? So that concludes this series, Thinking About What You're Thinking About. And next week, we're going to start a brand new series, Pathway to Aliveness. I'm really excited about this one, and I hope you guys come back and that you join me. So thank you guys for listening today. You made it to the end of the podcast, so it means you listened to the whole thing. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. If you guys have any questions for me, you can always reach out to Jill@thehappiestlives.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You can find access to any of my coaching programs if you want to work together at myhappyvault.com. Thank you guys, and I will see you again, talk to you again next week.
If you enjoyed this podcast, I would love to help you take this concept and apply it. Join me in Clarity and Courage, my cost-effective coaching program for Christian women. Each month, receive the tools you need to apply the concepts and grow. We will meet on a live coaching call where you can ask me anything. Plus, you get access to the worksheet workshop where you can have conversations with other women just like you. Learn more and sign up at myhappyvault.com/Clarity and Courage.